Thanks, Bruce. Well, we might make a start. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our meeting today, and a special welcome to Bev Ratton. I haven't been to the last couple of meetings, Bev. I don't know whether you've been here, but if you have been here, fantastic to see you. Great to see you again today. So thanks so much for coming. That's terrific. Anybody watched the women's soccer last night? Yeah, what a great result. What a fantastic result. It's really uplifting, I think. It's time of year. There's a real peace over this morning when I woke up, but it was great sitting up there and watching the women, and they virtually did it without Sam Kerr, so I'll be interested to see if she's fit enough. We play France or Morocco, I think, in the next round, so if she can get on the park, they might go fairly deep. We're all hoping, of course, that they'll go all the way, so that's just great to watch. We welcome any visitors this morning. Are there any visitors today?
I'd like to welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Ken Breer.
Ken Brown?
Ken Breer.
Ken Breer, welcome to you.
Breer, B-R-E-A-R.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ken, welcome.
Ted.
Have you been here before?
No, I haven't.
All right, well, fantastic to see you, mate. And hopefully it won't be the last time we see you. So hope you enjoy the day and the fellowship around the room. They're all good fellas. So great to see you here. Thank you. Any birthdays? Any birthdays? Don't have to be a particular note. No birthdays in the room. I think would have been my old man's birthday yesterday. He would have been 101 if he was going. Yeah. He checked out early, poor bugger, unfortunately. But there you go. All right. The Vice President is still up north in the tropical isles. So, Andrew, can I call on you to do the roll call for us, please?
Certainly, John. Morning, everybody.
Morning, Andrew.
We'll bounce the ball. Rob Adams. Peter Bedford.
Yeah.
Noel Benton. Bert Berryman.
Yes.
Bruce Bazant.
I think so, yes.
Heck Davis. Michael Doherty. I know you're here. John Doherty.
I think so.
Len Edwards. Robert Urbacher.
Yeah.
Alan Evans.
Present.
Brian Fitt.
Present.
Mick Francis is in Cairns. Bob Frensham. Noel Griffith.
Here.
Stuart Hall. Frank Henning. Bob Hill.
Apology for Bob.
Yeah.
Apology. Right. Thank you. Detlef Hingst.
Apology.
Thank you. John Horsfall.
Here.
Reg Jackson.
Apology.
Oh, thank you. David Jones.
Present.
Here.
Yeah.
David Lund.
Oh, David will be in later.
Okay. Jerry Mazzoletti.
You just ring her, she's waiting to hear from you.
What? Jerry Mazzoletti.
Which one
No
is ringing
appearance.
you? You ringing your mobile or the main phone?
Brian McMahon.
Got it now?
Apology.
John Metcalf. Gary Nervo. Gary, well, we know what Gary Papworth is, huh? His apology. Graham Ratton. Yep. Kevin Ryan.
I've still got your back.
Will Sembler.
Almost.
Colin Stiles. David Taylor. Les Sterling.
Present.
Keith Tupper.
Present.
Livia Turacek.
Yeah.
Yes, no, looks like he's here. Ian Williamson.
Yes.
John Parry Jones.
Present.
Joe Landsberg's here. Yeah. Phil Carter was coming, but it's an apology today. Ron Spenceley. Yeah. No, and the other, that's it.
Well done, thanks Andrew. Okay, we've got some committee reports to attend to now and invite our secretary, the imam, Colin Stiles, to.
The book club met successfully, and we would encourage others to join. It's philosophy and reading books basically. I congratulate Bev on the Origins Chorale, that was just fantastic. At the meeting we reviewed activities, and there's a new sort of lot of activities coming up, some novel, and we'd encourage everyone to be involved in those.
Yep,
That's it.
that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. Bertie, can you tell us how much money we've got? And by the way, just before you do, if we're all turned around, look who's here.
The troublemakers.
Hey!
No, I'll do it.
He's back.
No, not necessarily.
I think you're on the same sticks as. Are you going to recover quicker than Nick Dacos? He's on the same sticks.
No.
We know, Jack.
Gary Pack with your legend there, son.
Wonderful. All right, thanks, Gary. Bertie.
$1,516. We spent 154 during the month, and we've got 139 in ready cash. No change.
Very good.
You through there?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand David Lone will be along later. Is there anybody filling in his role as Almoner at the moment?
No.
No. Okay. And-
Detlef Hinks is under medical care for a throat problem.
He's getting a bit better.
Yeah.
He's on the event. The Detlef had a major binding and he's getting better.
That's good. Oh, that's good. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. External activities. Alan, you've been standing in for Mr. Papworth?
Yeah, we've only got, we've got the normal luncheons here, and they've all been booking in pretty well. But we got a luncheon at the Darabin RSL, 22nd of August. So if everybody could attend there, it'd be good, because the last one we had was a poor effort. So yeah, 12:30, 22nd of August at the RSL. Okay. Okay, that's it.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Okay, we'll move on now to Members' Corner. Young Colin. We all know our wonderful secretary is going to
Okay, I'll unveil this.
unveil this. Is that your surgical hat, or is that?
No, that's a
Solo?
petchy. That's a petchy.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Saya pergi ke Bandung, Indonesia karena saya ingin belajar bahasa Indonesia. Saya mahasiswa Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, tetapi belajar saya juga di keluarga di mana saya tinggal di dalam masyarakat Bandung. Well, there you go. That's my talk. I sincerely hope.
Carl, put the microphone on.
Okay. I thought that was loud enough. You want it even louder?
No, this is.
No, if you want this
Oh,
recorded.
this. You want it recorded? All right.
I've got one more here. That was bingo.
Should I do that again? Where should I put it? Here? Is that okay? All right.
We missed that first bit.
No, you don't want that again. Anyway, look, what I said then was I went to Bandung with the intention of being involved in an immersion program. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
With an immersion program of language and culture,
Yeah.
as well as being taught at the University of Education in Bandung. I stayed with a family, and the language of the family was Indonesian, and I did various tours around, and the language was Indonesian as well. So it really the whole works and how you go about sort of learning a culture and a language. But just for
one just for 2 weeks, so it's a little bit limited, but it's a good way of sort of consolidating whatever language skills you do have in another language. What about Indonesia? One thing is to sort of go there for a bit, but having some idea of Indonesia is a useful aspect, and it's an archipelago centred on the equator, and so there you have Java, Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi and West New Guinea. It's must have been fairly wet in Australia recently for this picture because it's a bit green over here, but there's a lot of cloud and a lot of greenness and a lot of tropical rainforests in Indonesia. It's interesting when you turn the light out and look at night time. So here's a view from a satellite really showing where the people are and where there's sophisticated habitation such that they leave their lights on at night time. Note the following. Obviously a bit going on here in Malaya, a little bit down here in Sumatra, a whole lot going on in Java, not much in Kalimantan, a little bit in Makassar in the Sulawesi, and not much in West New Guinea. This is a slide I share with Barry, and this really relates to the migration of Aborigines to Australia. This is at a time of about 60,000 years ago, and you can see that the oceans are a lot lower, such that now we have a common land mass called Sunda that encompasses Borneo, Sumatra, Java and so on. You have Australia as being connected to New Guinea and also Tasmania as part of the mainland, and you have these small little passages whereby the migration of Aborigines occurred. Note also the Wallace line, which is a separation between the habitat and the flora of this bit which is Asian and this bit which is drier. This portion of New Guinea is a bit different again. Briefly, the history then was about 130,000 years ago we had a warm period in Australia without megafauna. In this time of that picture, the sea level was 125 metres shallower, and we had migration of Homo sapiens at a fairly early phase in the distribution of Homo sapiens around Earth. The Homo sapiens that came to Australia were trapped when the oceans went up again 20,000 years ago. Okay, why learn Bahasa Indonesia? Well, it's the major country, it's closest to Australia. It's interesting economically and culturally important. I know Jokowi has been here recently, and other prime ministers have also, or presidents, but it's largely ignored by Australia, not well understood. And I'm involved in a group called Indo-Australia where we encourage and organise children from Indonesia to come and live in Australia in school for about 6 weeks, and reciprocally Australian students go to Indonesia. What about Indonesia and how do we compare the two? Well, this spreadsheet helps a bit. Description, it's got 17,000 islands. We're a continent. It straddles the equator and we're 40 to 10 degrees south. We're larger with the land masses of 1.9 million hectares to about 7.7 million hectares. Population's a big issue here. Indonesia's about 278 million, the fourth largest in the world, and we're only about 26 or 27 million. GDP, we're about 13th, they're about 16th, but that's influenced by population as well. What's probably more critical is the per capita income. We sit at about 65,000 per person, they're about 5. So on average, our income is about 15 times per capita greater than in Indonesia. Languages. Bahasa is a lingua franca. Because it's so dispersed, there's lots of languages. There's 700 languages, but it's essential for the country to work to have a common language. And they actually had a language conference early on to establish this as a way to nationhood. In Australia, we're predominantly English. So everybody in Indonesia speaks 2 languages. What about religion? Well, that's a very interesting point. 87% Islam, 10% Christian, Hindu, Buddhists. Compared with Australia, in the census, about 46% of people put down none or did not answer. So there's a big difference in adherence and how religion is viewed between the 2 countries. Public health, on average, Australians are about 15 years longer. The ethnic groups are interesting. In Indonesia, less than 1% are born overseas, but in Australia, 30% are. So this makes the countries a bit different. The history, geography, disasters, culture, wars, economy, education, rural versus city, Indigenous versus non-Indigenous, and politics and governance I leave for you to work through, but they're all important. Just with a little add-on for you. Indonesia has a very long history, and it has the following. It has various phases when Buddhism was the predominant social and governance structure, and places like Borobudur were built in about 700. After that was Hinduism, and in the time of about 1400, the Majapahit Empire actually formed modern boundaries of Indonesia, and that was with Gajah Mada. After that, 350 years of Dutch governance and rule, some brutal, some not so bad. Then we had about 4 years of Japanese rule, 3.5 years of Japanese rule. Then you have 4 years of fighting the Dutch between 45 and 49. Then you have the modern Indonesia. You have disasters, like in 1965. Oh, here's David. I gave an apology for you, which was wrong. Then in 1965, you had the disasters of genocide of about 500,000 people. But it's really, as it stands now, a stable and reasonable country, in my opinion. This is probably key to some of the philosophies of Indonesia. That's the Garuda, and this is the emblem. And on the Garuda, you can count up the feathers and various markings, and that symbolises the Declaration of Independence, which is coming up soon, 17th of August 1945. And so this is a celebratory day for all Indonesians, the 17th of August. The emblem in the middle is Pancasila. Pancha is Sanskrit for 5, and it's the 5 principles of their society. Belief in one God. The bull is the fact that you can solve things by societal consultation. The banyan tree is a Buddhist symbol, but that means unity and everyone's under the one sort of system. The ring is the idea of governance, justice, and the cotton and the rice is justice and equity of distribution of goods. All right, learning and teaching a foreign language, the people in Bandung, Islam, culture and all that sort of stuff. I'll give a few pictures and then I'll stop. This is just an introductory talk. Now there's Bandung, and up here we have the Villa Isola, which was, here we go. The Villa Isola is up here, and this is a building built in the Dutch style by a guy who made a lot of money out of media. That's now part of the university. That's the Gunung Sate, which is a colonial Dutch building, and there's some of the streets. And the streets are a little bit dirty, but there's always lots of people and quite a deal of civil behaviour. People treat each other with patience. Food's very important. And here we are sitting down, and note the following. Here's a lady in the jilbab, and here's a lady who doesn't have a jilbab on. It's a voluntary thing. About 70 or 80% of ladies wear jilbabs. This is the family I stayed with. They were very civilised. They did their own washing. This lady hung her bra out in the line, but she did wear the Muslim dressing. Food, street food's important and very tasty. The influence of Islam. Indonesians become Islamicised, and there's a lot of Saudi money. And this is an international proselyting group, Tawhid, and the most major constructions around Bandung were mosques, and they were funded by, as I said, Saudi money. When you go into the mosques, you're welcome. They're business centres as well as centres for religion. The mosques charge 2.5% tax, which is distributed for social welfare. They probably do a better job than the government in that regard. They really have a substantial imprint within the society, and I think do a good job. Okay, culture is very important. This is what Australia doesn't have. That's Barong. This is in Denpasar, and Barong's one of the gods who looks after you. Hindu culture with the Wayang Kocek here, lots of stuff like that. These are two important persons. That's President Sukarno and his daughter, Sukarno Putri. He really was an amazing man, but went off the rails a bit in '65 and disaster occurred. This is a program I went to, and it was a real-time drama between a university in Sydney and a university in Bandung, and that was quite an event. Of course, you go to the volcanoes. It's in the Ring of Fire, earthquakes and volcanoes. There's a cimet, and that's where we get coffee luwak from, out of the animal's tail end. I put this up, and I put it up before. when you talk to them in Indonesia, about what they think of women and how women are treated, they think those in Iran and Afghanistan are totally mad. This is a whole lot of girls who are going to a workshop for their university training. And in the university, the head of it was a woman, and they really treat women well. Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so you can talk to me later. Well, it's probably, I went too long.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Fantastic, Colin.
Bravo. I'll get the next speaker's call. You keep talking, I'll get this up for you.
Well,
It will?
yeah, it's got to go with the next speaker.
Yeah.
Here we are.
I went to a meeting there
Fantastic.
With any luck.
I've got to do the sing song.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
We've got some
I thought
books.
you might have forgotten that.
that's all right.
No, I was hoping.
Yeah.
Oh, here we are. Okay, done. I just quieten this down.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Colin. I've not been to Indonesia, and I don't know if I'd like to go there now because I think I've seen it. I don't need to go to Bali, I don't think. My surfing days are over. But that was informative, so thanks very much, Colin. Next on the agenda we have, we're going to have a bit of a sing-song. We've got Noel here today, so that's fantastic. Books have been handed out. Yeah.
Just before that in there, John, I've got a few little things I'd like to mention. Out in the thing, I get all these booklets from the annual council every month. They're out there on the little table. They tell you all the things that are going on. Please take one so you know what's happening. The other more important thing is that we've got a meeting, a big event down at Warringal Shopping Mall on the, where is it? On the 17th of August. We're down there in the shopping centre trying to promote our club, get new members, maybe even some younger members, which would be terrific. So you might see some of these around. This was fantastically produced by a genius over here. A great poster to go along and attract people to have a look at it and come along. So that's the second item. And the most important one is I've finally got some name tags done for some of our members, some of our new members, and if anyone doesn't have one, see me later on and I'll organise to make some for you. But I always wear my name tag for a very good reason, and that is so that I remember who I am. Takes a bit. So, Les Thurley, where's the gun?
Les is here.
There he is.
You got one.
You got one? There's two more, mate. You'll have to include some multiply. And Joe Landry. You got one too? Who did all these things for you? Someone's trying to push me out of the car. Thanks very much, John.
Thanks, Robert. Look, while we're going in, thank you. Keith, do you want to come up and you've got a couple of things that you wanted to mention this morning just before we start to sing along, before I forget it.
I'd just like to mention two events. One's a community one and the other one's a Probus one. A keen committee of people began a series of concerts back 28 years ago at the Rotary United Church on Sunday afternoons at the rate of about 8 or 10 every year. These continued regularly with enthusiastic audiences until COVID came along and mucked everything up. Over the past 3 years we've only had a few concerts, and now because of the age and infirmity of the organisers, it was sadly decided we'd wind this series up after 122 concerts. Sunday the 20th of August at 2 o'clock is going to be the final grand concert, and we've got a great lineup of singers and pianists. It's going to go on for a bit over 2 hours, and it's a really great afternoon that's coming up. The booking's already fairly heavy, but we have got some seats still available. I've even got some tickets in my pocket if anybody would like to check in this morning. It's $25 each. 2 o'clock on Sunday the 20th of August. So that's the concert, the Grand Farewell Concert at Arden Crescent. The second thing I'd like to mention, every year the district probate clubs have a church service, and they take it in turns to organise a service. This year it is the Rosanna Ladies Probate who are doing the organising, and the service again is going to be at Rosanna Uniting Church on Sunday the 17th of September. And we've just been able to confirm that the preacher for that day will be Andrew Bennett. Andrew is a local man who's a professor at the University of La Trobe, and he's going to speak on the theme of hope. And there'll be some emphasis on the organisation Hope Springs, which has provided a place to belong and friendship and care for people who've lived with mental illness for many years. That's going to be the theme of the service. So I thought I'd give you advance notice of that, Sunday the 17th of September. Thanks very much.
Good idea. Thank you, Keith. Thanks very much, Keith. All right, now we've got some bit of singing to do, so Noel's going to lead us. Noel, have we worked out our selection?
Well, the first one's There Is a Tavern in the Town, which is on page 6.
Thanks, David.
And we're just going to do the first verse. So go, maestro. Yellow Rose of Texas, which is page 7. And we'll do 2 verses. There's a yellow rose in Texas that I am going to see. Nobody else would listen, not half as much as me. She cried so when I left her, it did so break my heart. If ever I will find her, we never more will part. She's the sweetest little rosebud that kisses their new. Her eyes are bright as diamonds, they sparkle like the dew. You may talk about your Clementine and sing of Rosalie, but the yellow rose of Texas is the only girl for me. Now the other one is Johnny Come Marching, please, Johnny.
Page.
Page 8. Johnny, when Johnny comes marching home, and we'll do 2 verses. Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The village lads and lassies say, with roses they will strew the way, we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
Well done, guys. We'll just pass the books over. Or...
Yeah, good job. I love that soprano voice in there. It was fantastic.
Well, the chapel there.
Oh, yeah, it's
Okay, thanks everybody. I'd like to thank David Jones for organising our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker, if you've not met him already this morning, is Barry Blake, sitting opposite David over there. And his presentation today, Barry's a linguist and specialising in Australian Aboriginal languages. He's also an emeritus professor at La Trobe University. I understand he'll have a PowerPoint presentation this morning. And we welcome you, Barry. Looking forward to your presentation this morning. So without further, welcome you to the microphone.
We need to do something better with the microphone.
You just put this onto your
You can just flip it on it.
put this onto your shirt if that's okay. That's okay. You need to stay here.
Right, and you've got to get back to the beginning here. Okay. Yep, I might need a glass of water. Can I just get a glass of water?
Can we get a glass of water for Barry?
Just someone grab a glass of water.
Glass of water.
Glass of water for anyone.
And can you turn the main lights off, Cole? And we've got a light up here which will shine down. It'll also make.
Yeah, we have it, yep. Good. I'll just wait till I get a glass of water and I'll you can just put it there, can I?
You can?
Or yes, there's no level surface there.
Can I just
Fancy glass.
excuse you for a minute? Put that one.
Sure, that's wine, water.
Members, he's not very hearing, and that's a
Good.
microphone.
Good, thank you. Yeah, we're right, are we? Good. Okay, I think we're right. We might begin. Let's go to the first slide. So, with the previous talk, we had mention of this, that about 60,000 years ago,
Can I get a
human...
bit louder, please?
Want to speak louder? Louder?
My job at the back is to make sure we can hear up here.
To have those close as possible.
All right, okay.
If you can.
All right. So about 60,000 years ago, people began arriving in this part of the world. I hesitate to say Australia, because as you can see from that map, they came to a landmass, Sahul, which consisted of the Australian mainland, somewhat enlarged, taking in Tasmania, and of course taking in New Guinea. Over a period of time, the sea level rises and falls, and about 60,000 years ago, the sea level was comparatively low, and it was relatively easy to get to Australia through Indonesia with short sea voyages. The sea level, there was another ice age about 18,000 years ago, and at that time Australia would not have been fully inhabited, although the people might have spread over the whole continent initially. During that period the inland part of Australia was abandoned and then resettled. It's not certain how many people came or exactly when they came, but it's highly likely that people came not just in one particular period, but maybe it could have been over a period of some thousands of years people were coming. And the whole continent was occupied by 35,000 years ago, and as I mentioned a minute ago, the interior of the continent became uninhabitable at one stage. Now, Tasmania was separated from the mainland about 12,000 years ago, and New Guinea about 10,000 years ago. The dingo was introduced about 5,000 years ago, and as you can see from that, there are no dingoes in Tasmania. Fishermen from Indonesia, they're known as Macassans, but they didn't necessarily come from Macassar, were active along the northern coast of Australia, particularly in Arnhem Land, from the 18th to the 20th century. They came to fish beche de mer, sea cucumber. So there's very little outside contact with the rest of the world. We don't know who brought the dingo, and the people from Indonesia didn't have any lasting effect, although also contact from New Guinea across Torres Strait did mean the introduction of new technologies such as bows and arrows. So there you can see the same information again, with Australia and New Guinea joined 40,000 years ago, then Tasmania splitting off 12,000 years ago, and New Guinea 10,000 years ago. The Aborigines have long memories. In 1858, an Aborigine named Murray was standing at Williamstown looking out across the bay, and he said to a white fellow, he said, we used to hunt out there looking down the bay, he said, and that channel that the ships used to come up the bay, that was the Yarra River. And it's now known that that was true. Apparently 1,000 years ago, the heads were silted up, and what is now Port Phillip Bay was dry land traversed by the Yarra River, Werribee River, and so on. In South Australia, down in the Mount Gambier area, the people have a story about Crate Bull, the giant. Now, the craters of volcanoes are thought to be the ovens of giants, and they claim that Crate Bull moved his oven from Mount Muirhead near Millicent 20,000 years ago, if I've got the figures right, yes. And then he moved to Mount Shank, which is on the road between Port Macdonnell and Mount Gambier. And then that fire went out, and so he then moved to Mount Gambier. And archaeologists have shown that that is the sequence on which the volcanoes became extinct. Now, when the white fellow came to Australia and took over the country, there were numerous languages, and you can see a pattern there. You can't read the detail there, but you can see the huge number of languages. There are over 700 names, or 800, I've got the word 800, ballpark figure, it doesn't matter one way or the other, a large number of names. If we group the names together, when they share 70% of vocabulary, we get down to a figure of about 250. So 250 completely separate entities, but 800 languages in all. Now, on that point of grouping, there's Victoria, and you can see in Western Victoria, I've written there Western Kulin, which you can possibly read. You probably can't read the smaller labels. So the smaller labels are what Aboriginal people identify with. So there's Chapwarong near Hamilton, Djadjurong near Bendigo, Wergaya in the Wimmera. And if you compare Chapwarong and Djadjurong, you find they have 80% of vocabulary in common, so you can say, well, they're dialects of a single language. You have mutual intelligibility. And then you take Djadjurong and Wemba up near Swan Hill, they've got 80% in common. People could understand one another, dialects of one language. And then you can take Wemba and Lechi up near Mildura, 80%. But the thing is that it's only the neighbours that have the 80%. When you compare Chapwarong and Lechi, you're down to 50%. So it's a little bit unrealistic to say that it's all one language. It's sort of a mega language, and from a linguist's point of view, they're all similar. From an Aboriginal point of view, the differences are such that they wouldn't consider them an entity at all. So Aboriginal people identify with these smaller entities, and there are something like 800 of them. The 250 languages, and that means taking language to mean the groups where, say, going back to that slide, in Western Victoria we group all of those as one language in a certain sense, in the way that I mentioned, but perhaps unrealistically. If we take those 250, then they have completely separate vocabularies, which is a bit annoying. If you learn one language, it doesn't help you much with the other languages. There are pronouns and some verb roots that are common to virtually all the languages, which suggests that these languages are ultimately related, at least the ones of the mainland. The material available on Tasmania is very poor and consists only of word lists, but there are insufficient resemblances between the languages, any language of the mainland and the languages of Tasmania, to show that they're related. But given that time depth, I mean, cut off 10,000 years ago or more, you wouldn't expect there to be any relationship. And the same with New Guinea. We can't find any relationship between languages of Australia and New Guinea. And then it follows from that there are no relationships between languages of Australia and any other part of the world. Now, I'll talk about different parts of the language. First of all, the sounds, and then the grammar, and then the vocabulary. A strange thing about Australian languages is that the sound systems are much the same over the whole continent. Now consider the Romance languages, Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, French, Italian, all derived from Latin. So it was one language 2,000 years ago, but consider the sounds of Italian and the sounds of French, and you probably have some familiarity with those. They're completely different. But in Australia, all of these languages, many of which are only remotely related, have exactly the same sound system. So once you've learnt the the pronunciation for one language, it works pretty well for the others. In most languages, the words are of 2 or more syllables and then in a vowel. Think of words like kangaroo, wallaby, corroboree, and place names like Parramatta. The exception is Victoria, where we have names ending, or words in fact ending in various consonants. Bunyip, which is the mythical creature, Geelong, a place name of course, and Colac and Warrnambool. Geelong means tongue, Colac means sand, and Warrnambool's interesting. It means having fire, and presumably relates to the volcanoes in the area. And then lerp, which is an exudation from insects you get on plants which you can eat, and bort, which is the place name. So words in Victoria are rather different, but over most of Australia, words are like kangaroo, wallaby and so on. They're polysyllabic and end in a vowel. Human beings can make... All right, okay. Okay. Human beings can make over 100 different speech sounds, and each language chooses certain ones. There are differences, for instance, between American English and our English. For instance, you take the word P-A-W-N and P-O-R-N, Americans pronounce those differently. There used to be a song, There's a Pawn Shop in the Corner in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Do you remember that one? And that, of course, was a P-A-W-N shop. And Americans would make a distinction between P-A-W-N and P-O-R-N, and the same distinction is made in Aboriginal languages between, say, Wunka, life, and Wunka, a creepy crawly. A minister of religion told me once he chose for his sermon, I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will have eternal life. And when he started speaking, people started sniggering and laughing behind their hands and giving one another funny looks. At the end of his sermon, he said, what happened? They said, you said Wunka instead of Wunka. You said, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll have eternal creepy crawlies. One of the features of Australian languages is they have a lot of NG sound at the beginning of words, and people who are not brought up on that have terrible trouble pronouncing it and even sometimes hearing it. So the town Anarchy, it should be Nganiki, so it was recorded without the NG. And the man who appears on the $50 note, David Ngunaitpon, it should be, but the NG is lost, and then letter U is a tricky, we'll come up against that. And again, I suppose when you see that, you say David Ngunaitpon, so it's a long way from the original, which is Ngunaitpon. Australian languages don't have fricative sounds like f and z, any of those. And so when a word is borrowed from English with one of those sounds, it gets converted to a stop sound. So the word sister comes up as tidda. And of course, once people have tidda in their system, they don't necessarily recognise it's from English. And I heard someone interviewed on the ABC the other day, and they said that this was a widespread Aboriginal word for sister, but it's not an Aboriginal word, it's an English word in disguise. And Aboriginal languages don't have a word for sister anyway. They have older sister and older brother, and sometimes younger sister and younger brother, or sometimes just younger sibling. Now, when I was working in Queensland, I came across this word tubu for soap. Well, at least you get suspicious of that word because Aboriginal people didn't have soap. You think about it, soap, so there's no S, it comes out as a th, and the P is okay. There are only 3 vowels in most Australian languages, and the nearest one with soap would be oo, and then you can't have the word ending in the P, so you repeat the vowel, so soap comes out as tubu. And I suppose when that's first borrowed, the people who are converting soap to tubu understand it's soap, but later generations just come across this word tubu and don't see any relationship with soap. And fence, for instance, comes up as pinji. Sometimes the fricative sounds are simply omitted, so school comes up as kula and smoke as muka. Aboriginal languages don't distinguish the pairs PB, TD and KHG. Now, linguists, when they write these languages down, they normally standardise on one or the other. So linguists normally only represent those distinctions that matter from the point of view of meaning. So P and B are different in English, pill versus bill, but in an Australian language you can fluctuate between a P sound and a B sound without it affecting the meaning. And this causes some problems, like Walbury is written with P's, T's and K's, but the actual name of the language is pronounced Walbury with a B sound. Same happens with Arrernte. Now, there are 2 traditional spellings, Arrernte with an R, with a T and one with a D, and you see them there, and that's an indication of the fact that you could fluctuate between one or the other. The modern spelling, the 3rd one there, is just a more accurate one, Arrernte. I worked on a language called Kalkadoon. If you go to Mount Isa, you'll see signs around the place with the name Kalkadoon, the 3rd item there. It written in with all the sounds represented would be either Kalkadungu or Golkadungu, and the problem is with reference works it can be hard sometimes to find a language in a reference work because it could be spelt with one letter or the other. Now, moving on to the grammar of Australian languages is remarkably like the grammar of Latin. You have a case system where nouns have inflections to indicate things like the object or the direction, and there are also endings on verbs for first person, second person and so on. So in Taungurung, which is the language of the Goulburn Valley, and is very similar to Woiwurrung, the language of the Melbourne area, they're just dialects of the same language, to say the woman went from Bort to Geelong, Budge Yanai Boru Gelangda. So Budjo is woman, Yanai is go in the past tense. The root Yan for go is one of the pan-Australian roots. You find that all over Australia. Bort, you can see there, but spelt in the system. I'll come in a minute to talk about the way we have the spelling conventions. And then Geelong with a suffix on the end. So Bort has the suffix oo for from, and Geelong has the suffix da for two. Then to say the woman caught a fish with a net, bangai bajra wirab nandama. Bangai is catch in the past tense, bajur is woman, and you have a suffix on the end to indicate that she's the one performing the action. Wirab is fish, and nandama also has a suffix, the same suffix, to indicate the instrument that was used to perform the action. Note the word order. You can have different word orders. In fact, in most Australian languages, the word order is free. There are very few grammatical rules for word order. You can adjust the words to suit your meaning, putting what you want to emphasise first. And in the Victorian materials, there are a lot of examples of the verb first, so we're not certain whether there was complete freedom or perhaps the basic order was just to have the verb first. There's an example of how the grammar looks. There's the word for kangaroo, maram, and then, as I mentioned before, you have a suffix a, marama, to indicate that the person is, or animal is acting. So marama, by the kangaroo, maramal, of the kangaroo, maramdui, with the kangaroo, maramda, to the kangaroo, and maramu, from the kangaroo. If you're familiar with Latin or French or Italian, you'll remember that the verbs have endings for first person, second person, and third person. Well, Australian languages have those forms too, so there's the verb to hit in the present tense, jalbanan, jalbanar, jalbun, and then different forms for the past tense, different forms for the future. And there is a dual as well as plural. So in English we have singular and plural. Once upon a time, in the days of King Alfred, we had dual as well. So Australian languages in general have dual forms, and they also make a distinction between inclusive and exclusive. And we talked about Indonesian before. We have kita and kami, for instance, in Indonesia for inclusive and exclusive. There's an example from Deary in South Australia. So you have four ways of saying we. You have dual and plural, and then inclusive and exclusive, where inclusive means including you, exclusive means excluding you. Yep. Okay, now moving on to the vocabulary. As I mentioned before, apart from a score or so of words, which is very widespread, the vocabulary of languages varies a lot from one to the next. But there are a few interesting things, a few interesting features. For instance, the same word is used for skin, peel and bark. And when you think about it, the peel of, say, an orange or something like that is analogous to the skin, and the bark of a tree is analogous to the skin. And so in Arrernte you have yenba, which is, my pictures are meant to indicate skin, and then a fruit. I think that's a paddy melon, I think. And the word paddy melon is confusing because there's a paddy melon, a marsupial, and there's paddy melon, a little melon thing that grows on in a straggly sort of plant along the ground. And then in Nganyajara, the Western Desert language, or a dialect of the Western Desert language, which is spoken in the southern part of the Northern Territory and into Western Australia and South Australia, and you have the word Minyara. The same word is used for arm, front paw, wing and branch. And once again you can see the analogy that the paw of a dog, for instance a dingo, is analogous to the arm of a human being, and to the wing of a bird and the branch of a tree. So those pictures are meant to illustrate the arm, the paw, the wing of a bird and the branch of a tree. And in the Kulin languages of Victoria, we have words like tarak, tachak and jarak, and that's actually the same word, but there are different forms in different dialects. Now this is one of the most interesting ones. It took me a while to get onto this. Look at the pictures of the hands and look at the words above there, and you see Puchi Manya is the front of the hand and Wart Manya the back of the hand. Nothing to comment on there. But when it comes to the feet, see what the front of the foot is. It's the underside is the front of the foot, and the metatarsal area there is the back of the foot. But when you think about it, it makes sense anatomically, doesn't it? Think of where the nails are, okay? I had trouble getting onto that because in the 19th century, the instep, if you look up the Oxford Dictionary, the instep is the part of the metatarsal area, the curve down from the shin to the toes. Whereas for us nowadays, the instep is the underside of the foot. So it took me a while to get onto that because of the English materials. The thumb is considered the mother of the hand, and the big toe the mother of the foot. And I've got different languages there. You could go around Australia and find numerous languages, numerous examples of that. So the common way of looking at the thumb and the big toe, and of course there's an analogy once again anatomically, isn't there, between the thumb and the big toe. One corresponds to the other. Now this is an interesting one too. The same word is used for the hip, the eyebrow and the moon in some languages. I can't say that this is general. And when I first came across that Tanyuk, the hip and eyebrow and moon, I just thought it was a coincidence. But then I discovered in another language the same word was used. Taruk in the Gunditjmara language of the Warrnambool area was used for the same. So what do they have in common? Well, I guess it's the curve. It's like the Latin word sinus, S-I-N-U-S, which we know as sinus, the anatomical term, and then so think of a sine wave. So in Latin, sinus means a bay or inlet or bosom or lap. And so it's the curve that's the common thing. And I suppose that's the common thing, the curve of the hip, the eyebrow, and the moon. I don't know whether it's the crescent moon. Makes more sense perhaps if it's the crescent moon, but as all we have recorded is moon, not specifically crescent moon. The snake is interesting too. The snake is the one with the neck. Well, a snake's almost all neck, isn't it? There's no ending to a snake's neck. You've got the head and then you've got the neck, but where does the neck end? The platypus is duckbill. Now, wurrung, dulai is the duck part, and wurrung is the word for mouth or lips, and it also then becomes the word for language. So the language of the Melbourne area is Woiwurrung, and the language of the Goulburn Valley is Tangung Wurrung or Tangwurrung. And the first part means no, and Aboriginal people ask me about it. What's this no business? Well, it's like in English, we talked about the Nain people or the Nada people and so on. If we named languages in Europe by their word for no, the Nyet people and so on. So in Australia and in the southeast, many of the languages just take the word for no to be the distinguishing feature. So that's the Nada people, or that's the No people, or that's the Nyet people, or whatever. The echidna is regularly known as the spine having one or the spike having one, and that makes sense, doesn't it? And once again, you can see that different languages look on it the same way and use their own words. So lik in Wadi Wadi up in the Swan Hill area, lik is the word for a spike or a spine, and will is the having suffix, and then the same suffix comes up in the Chapwarong language, and it comes up as gil in Gunditjmara. Now the koala is an interesting one. In the Wadi Wadi language, in Swan Hill, the word for koala is literally tree fork bottom. And when you get to the next language, Wemba, which is next door, you find tree fork bottom too, but with different words. I mean, the word for bottom happens to be the same, but Patjan is tree fork in Wadi Wadi, and Ngarambul is tree fork in Wemba. So they must both see the koala in terms of tree fork bottom. I don't know, I'm just guessing, but perhaps because that's the thing you most often see is the bottom sitting in the tree fork. And then in Chapwarong and Gunditjmara, they call the koala well, to do with the ears. So one mob, the Chapwarong mob, talk about two ears, and the Gunditjmara talk about having ears. And I suppose the ears are prominent, aren't they, on a koala? Now, when it comes to vocabulary, one of the things that people often comment on, usually adversely, that these people couldn't count. Well, they do count, but they don't have many counting words. So there are words for one, for two. The word for three is usually just two and one. The word for four is two and two. And the word for five is the word for hand. Just excuse me while I have a sip. They have words for plenty or many, but they do count, but they count on their body. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've left out 7 and 8 for some reason, I don't know why. 9 elbow, 10 bicep and 11 shoulder, and going up the body and down the other side, they get to over 30. Now, besides their normal language, they all have secret language, which you use in front of your mother-in-law. You cannot speak to your mother-in-law in an Aboriginal society. You can't have any dealings with your mother-in-law. For instance, you can't pass her anything directly. If you want to pass something to her, you have to put her down on the ground and she can pick it up. If she walks past, she's not supposed to see you. She's supposed to put her hand up like a blinker. And if you want to know whether she wants a piece of meat or something, you have to ask an intermediary to ask her whether she'd like a piece of meat or some bread or whatever. These secret languages are sort of codes. So if you have to speak in the presence of your mother-in-law, you have to use the secret code. And the secret code consists of about 300 or 400 words. So if you have different words for different kinds of lizard and goanna and so on, in the secret language it'll just be one lizard type word. So it's a restricted vocabulary, but must be used in the presence of a mother-in-law. Okay, we'll come now to the last part of the talk, the language survival, which is a big topic at the moment, and you probably come across references to this in newspapers fairly often nowadays. I mentioned there were about 250 completely separate languages, 750 or so if you count the dialects separately. Only about a dozen of those are still spoken and passed on to the next generation. Jumbaboingu in Arnhem Land, Pidgin in Central Australia, Walbury, Central Australia, and Tiwi spoken on the Tiwi Islands. Now, I've taken those figures from the web, but in the case of Tiwi, the language that's spoken nowadays is quite different from traditional Tiwi. It's been modified quite a bit by English. A few score of languages have a few speakers still, but nearly 200 are dead and are at present being reclaimed from 19th century records. In Victoria, there are some recordings of the last speakers made in the 1960s. There was a woman called Louise Schwarzschild, or she became Herkus when she married, a refugee from Nazi Germany, and she went around in the 1960s recording what could be recorded and was able to get quite a bit of material on Wemba Wemba, Swan Hill, Wergaya and the Wimmera, and Mati Mati at Piangle. Piangle is just downstream from Swan Hill. For the Melbourne language, Woiwurrung, she recorded about 100 words but no grammar. Now, all the other sources for the languages of Victoria are from the 19th century, and these records present difficulties of interpretation because English had no consistent means of representing vowels, and letter U is the worst. It can be as in but, U as in put, and U as in used. If you look at the materials, say you want the word for eagle, you can see all those spellings, the P-U-N-G-I-L, B-U-N-J-E-L and so on. And as I mentioned before, there's fluctuation between P and B, so that's why you get P and B spellings. Letter G, and wonder whether it's a hard G or a soft G. Well, you find a J in some versions, so it must be a soft J. And what about the letter U? Is that punjul or punjul? Well, eventually you find some double O spellings, so it must be bunjul. And I get a bit annoyed when Aboriginal people sometimes say bunjul, because it means it's not a true tradition. They're actually learning this stuff from written materials. Sometimes at Dreamtime of the G, for instance, you'll hear somebody talk about bunjul and they say bunjul. It should be bunjul. Now, why they mention it, it's not just the word for eagle, it's the eagle ancestor, a leading Dreamtime figure, and it's one that Christian missionaries equated with God, and when they want to translate God, they usually use bunjul mama, which is bunjul plus the word mama, which is father. And, you might be surprised that mama is father, but mama, if you go around the world's languages, mama, baba, dada, and so on, come up with the meanings mother, father, aunt, and so on, but not consistently aligned. So they're based on the babbling or early syllables uttered by children. The word for white man is ngamajik. Look at the spellings in the 19th century. You can see the initial NG, but then in the third spelling there, it's completely missed. And once again, is the G hard or soft? Well, there's some spellings with the J, so you decide that's ngamajik. Now, my favourite example is this next one. Look at the first spelling of that last word, which means again or more. Letter U, NG. What would you make of that? Well, because you have other spellings, you can eventually work out it's yuang. So the first letter U you take to be U as in usual, the second letter U as in but, and it's yuang. But it can be quite difficult to work out the pronunciation from the old records. Linguists then respell the words in a consistent way using the International Phonetic Alphabet values, which are the values of all the languages of the world except practically English. I mean, if you think of the words, whether they're Italian or Romanised, Japanese and so on, letter I will always be E and not I and so on. So nothing too surprising about that. A couple of mobs, though, use double O for U and so on. The people down in Warrnambool are using the double O spelling, as in Woolloomooloo. The trouble is, if you want to have a long oo and a short oo, you can't really write O, can you? So it's not a very good system. It's better to have a single letter for each vowel. So these things then get respelt, as I mentioned, and take the word for land or country, and the spellings there are shown at the left. You can see B-E-E-K, B-A-K and B-I-I-K. It'd be pretty obvious that the pronunciation was beak, and so that would get respelled in the IPA conventions as B-I-I-K. It comes up as in Nillumbik, the Shire out Eltham way, which means bad country. Strange choice, isn't it? Why would you call something bad country? And Millumbik rather than Millumbik, but that's not too bad. But recently, Moreland got renamed, as you probably know, and they call it Merrybeck. And I see an article in the paper where Aboriginals saying, well, what's this Merrybeck? I've never heard of either of those. Well, Merry is supposed to mean rocks, I think, but I know it only as the name of Merry Creek. I can't find it in the sources. And of all the spellings, they've chosen the odd one, the B-E-K one, which seems strange. Banyule means hill, and we have the city of Banyule. You can see the spellings there. Once again, the alternation between P and B, and I suppose the middle one, B-A-N-U-L-E, might be obscure, but you can see that it's Banyule from the spelling with the N-Y. And Yallock Creek gets disguised. Morty Yallock, for instance, is Murdy, and Yallock. Murt is short. Morty is what it becomes in a compound. You add a suffix E for the first word in the compound, and Murt plus Yallock, Morty Yallock is Short Creek, and Morty Yallock is I think Big Creek from memory. There's an indication of how much material is available for language revival in the southeast. So For the Warrnambool area, you have about 2,500 words, or for Central Victoria, about 2,500 words recorded, but for some of the other languages, only small numbers of words recorded. So what do you do when you have limitations in vocabulary? Well, you can extend the meaning of existing words, you can compose a new word by compounding or using a suffix, or you can borrow words from English or another Aboriginal language. So some of the extensions are fairly obvious. The word that means path or track is extended to mean road or street. The word for hut or camp is extended to cover house or home. The word for lightning is extended to cover electricity, and the word for thunder is extended to cover gun. As I mentioned, you can make up words using compounding or using suffixes or something like that. In the South Australia, in the Mount Gambier area, they've taken the word bungle doctor and tunga tooth to make up dentist, tooth doctor. That's a fairly obvious one, but not so obvious as the next one. They've taken bungle doctor and ngula camp and joined the two together in a blend, like we do with brunch and smog and so on, give Pangula the local health centre. To give an example using a suffix, Jerang is the word for leg, and in the Woiwurrung, and there's a suffix alak, which means having to do with, so something having to do with the leg, trousers, and Jinang foot. Jinang alak is footwear, something to do with the foot. Words can be borrowed and have been borrowed from English over a period of time, and the word for dinner, for instance, is borrowed from English, and it refers to the meal in the middle of the day. And of course, I remember as a kid, you probably can too, remember we talked about Sunday dinner, you'd have a roast for Sunday dinner. Nowadays, of course, we use dinner for the evening meal, but the older usage survives in Aboriginal usage. In fact, quite a lot. The word gammon, for instance, is common in Aboriginal talk now, gown for the average dress that you'd wear during the day. Now, some of the tricky ones, the word in Western Desert for hem is doubler. It's the word double, because the hem is the doubled over bit, isn't it, of the material. And the word for chain is based on handcuffs, but it gets rather disguised. There's no H, so it comes out as the N's okay, but we drop the D anyway. The K of cuffs is okay. The F comes out as a P, and then you have to have another vowel because the word can't end in a P. So runkapu. But once it's borrowed, the next generation wouldn't see any resemblance between that and handcuffs. And then in Arunta, the word for matches is based on Lucifer, and you can see how the S has come out as a T, and the F has come out as a P. And Lucifer was a brand of matches, I think, are no longer around. Now, what happens with this language revival? What do people do? Well, they love composing and delivering a welcome to country, and of course they get paid for it too, which is an incentive, I guess. They like to compose and deliver formal addresses. They translate into language traditional stories recorded in English. They translate English nursery rhymes and songs into language. They supply native names as alternatives for English place names. They supply Aboriginal names for properties in response to requests. And they supply meanings for Aboriginal place names. Puckapunyal. Puckapunyal has the Banyul word as the second part, as Hill is a bit uncertain as to what the Pucka part actually does mean. There's a move nowadays to introduce Aboriginal languages in school, and it's very widespread to have Aboriginal language in primary school, concentrated in the early years of primary school. It involves fun games, singing songs, and all students are taught the language. Now, in areas outside Victoria, Aboriginal children outnumber the non-Aboriginal, but typically in Victoria, the non-Aboriginal children outnumber those who identify as Aboriginal. There's a national curriculum outline for Indigenous languages that covers all years up to year 12. So there's a scheme of how the language should be introduced how the culture should be introduced, and you insert into the template whatever language you want to use. Now, that would make sense for languages where the culture is still around and the language is strong, Pidgin, Tjara, Aranda, Mirrabata, Tiwi perhaps, but it's hardly feasible where a language is revived from limited materials. It's not like learning French where you can go to France, or learning Indonesian where you can go to Indonesia. You cannot travel to a country where the language is spoken effectively. I mean, I know you can go to Alice Springs and so on, but it's not, you can't really go to an area where you need to speak the language and can use the language to interact with the culture. And there's very little in the way of literature available. Problem too in reviving the language is that the speakers are scattered. For instance, the Watawurrung people have a centre in Geelong and one in Ballarat. Grammar is difficult and is pretty dull, really. I mean, did anybody enjoy learning Latin grammar or French grammar? It's not a lot of fun. The end product might be fun, but not the actual grammar. The vocabulary and grammar are incomplete. Imagine a Latin grammar which might be 250 pages. Imagine if it's been in a fire and you've got only 50 pages left. Well, that's really what you've got with the grammar in the southeast. You've got this incomplete grammar. There's also problems of attitude. Older people don't like younger people knowing more than they do, and they consider language a private possession not to be shared. This applies to vocabulary, not to structure. Nobody worries about grammar, but they have ownership when it comes to words. And some Aboriginal people want to keep the language to themselves. They don't want it taught outside the community, a problem if a language is to be introduced into school. And some of them don't want outsiders teaching the language. Well, there we might finish. And that's my last slide when I give you the southern end of the Grampians, Mount Sturgeon and Mount Abrupt. And they are seen as the noses of giants lying on their back, and there the nose is pointing up. And that's another interesting thing I haven't got time to talk about today. If you go around the place names, there's some interest to be had in analysing the meaning of the place names. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Barry, are you happy to take a couple of questions if there's some questions? Any questions? Yeah. Thanks.
Barry, I'd just like to know, given the common possession thing with the Aborigines, and like everybody's common, but well, from what we understand as Europeans, they have common possession of all sorts of things. Do all the Aboriginal peoples of the various tribes have words for please and thank you? I've never saw anything like
No, I've never come across please or thank you, no.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Barry, I'm just wondering, you're learning and very interested in language and Aboriginal languages. When you talk to Aboriginal people, are they very comfortable with you learning their language, or do they think that's something that's really their property and they should be learning?
Look, I started 50 years ago, and all these attitudes didn't exist. They were quite happy for me to learn their language. And although at that time we talked a bit about it being useful for future generations, basically it was the white fella, collecting it for himself. The people would be willingly recorded. I never came across a case where they were unwilling to be recorded. It's only in the modern context where we have these old records that, and people no longer know the language, that these attitudes come up of keeping it to ourselves and older people not wanting younger people to know more than they do.
Yeah. Please.
Is there much intermarriage between people of different tribes?
Yes, there always was, and the woman's the one who had to move usually, and all Aboriginal people were multilingual, and that would be part of it. I mean, you grow up with a mother speaking a different language from the father. Yes, it was intermarriage between tribes was common, between neighbouring tribes, yes. They travelled fair distances. I mean, if you read the early records of Melbourne, the people in the Goulburn Valley were commonly in Melbourne. Imagine walking, you know, from north of the Great Divide to Melbourne. It's a fair walk, isn't it? But they did it, yeah.
Anybody else? Barry, can I ask you, is there a reasoning behind, you talked about the forbidden, the taboo in relation to mothers-in-law and such. Is there reasoning behind that?
Oh yes, I think so. I mean, look, in our society, remember, mother-in-laws have a certain place in our culture. We have jokes about staying like a mother-in-law and cold as the mother-in-law's kiss and so on. Not so common nowadays. But I mean, there's a problem with the mother-in-law, isn't there? Because there's a conflict for the woman. She's got loyalty to her mother and then loyalty to the husband, and then the husband's likely to resent the influence of the wife's mother on his wife. And I think it's just a universal thing, but obviously seen as a bigger problem in Aboriginal society, and they've taken means to eliminate the problem.
That seems very effective. All right then, so unless there's any other questions, Barry, thank you so much for your presentation today. Very informative, certainly opened my eyes a bit. And on behalf of the club, thank you for coming along today.
Oh, thank you.
I'll take that
Thanks.
Yeah, excellent presentation and very interesting and informative.
Oh yes, yes. Oh yes, I thought about that. There's also there's another thing too, isn't there? Yeah.
Is there any other items of general business? Anything anybody else wants to raise before we conclude the meeting this morning?
Thanks, Phil.
I don't think so. Okay, well if that's the case, then we'll conclude our meeting. Thanks everybody.
John,
yes?
just 1 minute.
Oh yes, Gary?
Seeing that I haven't been here for quite some time, I'd just like to thank everybody for their kind wishes since I've been on the sick list. And to put you in the picture, I had to wait 2 months to get my operation on the knee, which was done on the 15th of last month. I got an infection, a urinary tract infection, and I was in absolute agony for 2 months before I could have it done, and other people would know that you can't have anything done with any poison in your system. But I'd like to thank everybody for their kind wishes, and the card that was sent to me, brought by David's wife, Jackie, which was really great. Thank you all again, and I hope I can get back in another couple of months. I'll be back on board to help you with whatever we've got to do. Okay? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thank you for making the effort today, and also great to see Johnny Horsfall here today as well. All right, gents, that's it. Thank you. Lunch.